Good evening, welcome to my channel. As ever, I shall be reading you I won't be reading a 1,000-word story. I'm reading a much longer story today, but it's based on 5 random words, as most of my stories are, but not all. The 5 words that were selected randomly by an algorithm for me are, and this story, which is written for a specific purpose, as you'll see, or maybe understand by the end, is called Cloud and Moon Shadow. I've been running now for 11 hours straight, and for the last 3.5 I've known I'm in trouble. The inaugural El Paso ultramarathon seems like a hazy dream now, something I must have imagined prior to waking up this morning. Where are the other competitors? Where are the marshals? Where is the signage? This featureless desert holds nothing to indicate whether I'm on the right trail, which is little more than a casual finger scrawl in the dust, a pattern made by an errant child. A dark cloud of fear is brewing somewhere behind me, a familiar fear, which is also the only familiar thing in this brutal landscape. My name is Melody Cloud McFarlane. With a name like that, it might not surprise you to learn that I was born in a Volkswagen camper van in the backwoods of Indiana. My parents were some itinerant session musicians, him 20 years her senior. My mother, a would-be singer-songwriter with a heavenly voice, but terrible luck. They both took far too many drugs and enjoyed the vicarious edges of life too much to stay in one place too long. One drunken evening when I was 12, my father shot my mother in a rage, then drove to get help, weeping, with me cradled in her arms while she bled out in the back seat. The police intercepted him at the hospital. He'd called them in a fit of remorse. The next time our paths crossed, it was at the trial, which my new foster parents grudgingly allowed me to attend. He got 10 years, but died of an overdose in prison. And just like that, I was orphaned. If my parents were forever running from something, I inherited that restlessness too. But my need to keep moving was a literal one. I ran everywhere. When my foster parents, Arlene and Thomas, 2 kindly, born-again, ordinary Texans, enrolled me in a local school in Austin, I discovered track and field, and then trail running. Finally, in my early 30s, working as a programmer for an app development agency, I found ultra-running and my métier. Within 2 years, I was in the lower reaches of the leaderboard, a runner with potential. Now, at the first ever El Paso to Sierra Blanca Ultra, I'd been in 3rd position right around the time I'd evidently strayed from the correct path. The first 65 miles to Diablo Canyon had gone about as well as a bakingly hot desert ultra can go. As the first race of its kind, the organizer's budget had been rudimentary. However, the 3 aid stations I'd passed, sparsely staffed from the back of trucks and trailers, had at least been packed with orange halves, sandwiches, watermelon slices, olives, dates, peaches and pecans from the local growers. The race marshals, mostly local middle-distance runners and ordinary, kindly non-athletic types, seemed stunned that we'd made it to checkpoint 3, just 5 miles downstream from the nuclear power plant. "Don't drink the water," they joshed, while filling up our bladders and dousing our foreheads with wet sponges. My neck was aching from where my new camelback was chafing, and my lower abdomen felt like I'd been punched there several times. My calves were tight, but a bit of a massage seemed to loosen them off. Also, despite the KT tape I had put across my nipples and my well-padded sports bra, they felt raw from the movement of the straps. I stopped to adjust things, drank about a half-litre of water and gulped down some soft fruit. My throat was too parched to attempt anything that needed much chewing. "Who's been through?" I asked, having to repeat myself since my first attempt came out as a kind of croak. It took a while for the well-tanned woman in the Stetson to twig that I was talking about the leading girls. "Oh, the Asian one just after 2, and then Josie something. About 10 minutes ago? Maybe you can catch her." That would be Jen Cho and Josie Candless, the 2 JCs, who were one another's biggest rivals in the rarefied world of ultra-running. They had a good 24 medals and belt buckles between them. I was the outlier here, with just 4 wins, my greatest being that year's Leadville 100. I was now one to watch, according to Runner's World and Trail Runner magazine. Still, the marshal's positivity hit home. I smiled thinly, handed back my paper cup of ice-cold water, shouldered my pack, and headed off again. That was about 4 hours ago. I've been pushing doubts to the back of my mind for so long I've forgotten what optimism feels like. As one of the fastest ultra-runners in the States, I'm used to being out on my own, but generally there will be photographers, well-wishers, maybe even the occasional curious bystander to cheer me on. I haven't seen a single soul since the couple of ranchers on horseback I spotted on a ridge about 2 hours ago. My running watch tells me it's 6:35 p.m, and there's now around 90 minutes of daylight left. I have the mandatory head torch and emergency foil sleeping bag in my pack, but I'd hate to use either of them because that means I'm having a disaster of a day. The scrubby vegetation as I round a rocky ridge whips at my ankles, finding the vulnerable inch between my ankle socks and calf compression sleeves. I ignore the discomfort, in part because there are so many other sources of pain to enjoy. My feet feel like they've been beaten with a meat tenderizer. There are probably blisters there that would horrify my podiatrist, but there's no way I'm going to take my shoes off now. There's a pain flaring up my left thigh, which is something new entirely. To avoid the worst of it, I realise I've been putting more weight on my right leg, which is irritating my patella. My back's beginning to ache a little, although the water has all but vanished from my pack, so at least it's lighter. Despite the Foreign Legion style cap and veil I'm wearing, I feel like my neck is burning on the sides, and my third application of Factor 50 sunscreen doesn't seem to have affected the flaky burn on the bridge of my nose. Still, I've dealt with worse, and assuming I'm still on the right trail, there can't be more than 10 miles between me and the final checkpoint at mile 90. Perhaps all I have to do is repeat my usual mantra, I'm here because I want to be, and forge on. I think about my foster parents who said they'll be waiting at the finish line with my favourite dishes, a spicy bean burrito and homemade vanilla ice cream, which they'll have kept cold in their cool box under packets of ice I fully intend to fasten to every extremity. The ice is almost more delicious to think about than the ice cream. To give my addled, pain-stricken brain something else to do, as I force my steps into an efficient cadence, I think through the recipe for bean burritos. I see myself preparing the dish in a well-ventilated open-air kitchen through which blows a cooling breeze. Half an hour later, the trail peters out. When I say it ends, I don't mean that it becomes less visible. No. The path, which I now realise must be some sort of ancient coyote or cattle trail, hits a fence that extends left and right as far as the eye can see. No signage, no warning. My heart sinks as I realise that someone, either one of my rival runners or a mischievous passerby, must have switched a marker arrow at one of the forks and sent me, and possibly other runners far behind, the wrong way. I feel a strangely icy fear begin in the pit of my stomach and radiate out. This could be catastrophic. The Chihuahuan Desert is more than 500,000 square kilometres across, with at least a third of that on the US side of the border. I'm lost somewhere within that northern wedge, and I can see nothing but dusty, almost barren rocky desert and ridged mountains in all directions. The air is getting chilly, and the sun lies off to my right, perhaps 40 minutes from sinking behind a grey-blue ridge and committing me to the head torch. Abruptly, I feel utterly fatigued, but I decide to keep walking, turning right and heading straight towards that golden ball of light. I feel particularly glad of my shades. After 15 minutes, I feel the black cloud descending. The black cloud is my pet name for the depression that blighted much of my early teens, resulting in a period of self-harm. I kept a cutting kit in the cistern of the upstairs bathroom at Arlene and Thomas's place. I realised with dread that this could be my last day on Earth, a ridiculously overblown thought, but a not unreasonable one. In the desert at night, the temperature regularly dips towards zero, and I'm wearing a couple of thin layers of lycra and polyester. Even the waterproof jacket in my pack and the foil blanket won't help if I'm out here lost for days, wandering around without water, with no idea where I am or where I'm heading. I have to hit a road soon, abandon the race, chalk it up to bad luck and poor decision-making. One DNF in a career isn't a total disaster. Meanwhile, Arlene and Thomas will be frantic with fear. My phone offers not even the hint of a signal, as expected. While I'm staring at my iPhone, I trip and stumble, entirely failing to get my feet back under me in time to avoid sprawling in the dust. My knee grazes a rock, and my hands and wrists take the impact of the hard-packed earth. It's the last straw, and I scream out in frustration. Nothing answers me but echoes from the distant mountains. My left palm is cut, and I press it against my top, leaving a bloody smear across my breast. The iPhone miraculously is intact, but useless. I'm sitting in the dirt, having pretty much decided to give up, whatever that entails. I can maybe get a signal on my phone if I climb a ridge. I'll call for help. They'll send a jeep or a helicopter or something. It will be humiliating, but the relief will replace shame eventually. Then I notice what I've tripped over. A weird conglomeration of button-like cacti, each a little larger than my thumb. They look like miniature squashes, and I've kicked one of them loose, or rather broken it off, since the buttons seem to be the tops of submerged roots. I pick the broken bit off the ground and roll it in my hand. The cutaway portion is slightly wet, and I find myself licking it. There's a bit of moisture there and a bitter taste, and a word pops into my head. Peyote. Shit, I've stumbled across a peyote patch. My middle name isn't Cloud because I had hippie parents. In fact, it's because of my grandfather. He was a Navajo, or so I'm told, although I never met him. He died before I was born. My birth father, in a rare moment of sensitivity, called me after him. Silver Cloud was his name. I remember Dad telling me with a grin that he used to get pure mescaline from Grandad, extracted from the peyote root. Being half Navajo, my dad was allowed to purchase peyote for religious purposes. Not that its legality or lack of it bothered him or my mother much. They'd drop an ounce of anything given half the chance. I remember seeing these buttons lined up and drying on a windowsill, somewhere in my early childhood. Could I eat some? Would it give me strength or dull the pain? Hell, it was half crazy, but maybe worth a shot. I had no idea about dosage, so I decided just to nibble carefully at the root until it took effect. I was 1/4 Native American, so I'd just be getting in touch with my roots, wouldn't I? The stupid pun made me laugh out loud, and I hauled myself to my feet and began to stagger on, wincing at the acrid taste of the peyote button as I gnawed at it. Like a lost Aboriginal child, I decided to follow the fence. Fences need maintenance, and maintenance requires access roads, I think dimly, already a little delirious from exhaustion and dehydration, let alone the chemicals that are now filtering their way into my bloodstream. Soon the sun goes down in a blaze of fiery red, like a livid wound. I feel a wooziness begin to soften the edge of my consciousness as twilight descends. Weirdly, I don't seem to need my head torch. In part, I suppose this is due to the full moon that has risen unseen behind me, but it's also due, I realise dimly, to an enhancement of vision that accompanies the peyote as my body begins to absorb the drug. My cadence increases, and I imagine my ruined feet as beaters striking the surface of a taut drum. I hear a melody forming from those steady steps, a beautiful and clear song that I imagine rising like steam from my hot feet. Surely the birds and beasts of the desert will be called to follow such an astonishing music. Then my shadow falls before me, a moon-made shadow, impossibly bright. Moon Shadow, I think with glee. That will be my name from now on, assuming I make it. I will make it. The shadow is somehow lighter than its surroundings, an impossibility I attribute to the mescaline. Even more peculiar is the moment when this pale blue shade begins to extend a scrawny hand that isn't a shadow of my own. It's my grandfather's hand, I'm suddenly certain, pointing me away from the fence and towards a thin vein-like path between shrubs that can only have been made by snakes, rabbits, or mice. I'd never have seen it in a million years without the beckoning hand directing me towards the near invisible furrow. I'm led on by the hallucination, like a needle riding the groove of an old vinyl LP, over a rise and down into a valley. Moments later I see a glittering trail of sparks, pale yellow and red, floating on the valley floor. No, they're not sparks, they're the headlights and taillights of cars. I've found a highway. My grandfather's hand is gone, leaving only the shadow, which continues to drift before me, pointing the way to some species of rescue. Apparently, I'm informed later, I staggered like a broken doll down onto Highway 10 and promptly collapsed. I awake in a hospital bed with my parents standing anxiously by. I'm strung up to an IV drip, confused and hardly capable of speech. I also have a splitting headache, and everything, and I mean everything, aches. And there on the bedside table, beside my participant's medal, which Arlene forced the chastened race committee to provide, is the half-gnawed remains of a peyote button. I've had the most intensely vivid dream during my peyote-lulled sleep. I'm sitting on the tailgate of a truck high up in the mountains overlooking a lush green valley. Beside me sits an elderly Navajo man, with face ridged deep like the mountains, presumably my grandfather. He holds my hand and does not speak as we both gaze silently down at a rushing river leaping over boulders. For some reason, in the dream, I'm still wearing my racing gear. As I stare down at the river, beyond my running shoes, my grandfather finally speaks, his voice oddly high and gentle. You are at your most magnificent, not when you breast the tape, but when the end is in sight and you know you will finish. Although it comes from a drug-addled dream, it's a sentiment I hold dear to this day, 37 medals and 49 races later. The end is in sight, and I know I will finish. So, thank you. That story was written for a specific running magazine. Now, I don't know whether they're going to accept it, but I will let you know if they do. Hope you enjoyed it. It does come a little bit from my own experience of being lost whilst on a very long run, but not in a desert. And I did enjoy doing research into peyote and Navajo traditions in Texas and things like that. So anyway, yeah, thanks for listening, and I will see you again very soon. Bye-bye.